Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Rachel Rubel. It's a gathering of leaders who together represent a significant share of the world economy. The Brics, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, held their 10th summit in Johannesburg to address a host of global issues. And none was more pressing than the all-out trade war being waged between the U.S. and China. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also attended this year's summit, highlighting the potential relationship that Turkey could have with the bloc in the near future. James Kim has more on why Turkey might be interested in expanding its ties with the group.
It's an invitation high on symbolism, given the high stakes involved. And with the group pushing against an old order long dominated by the West. Although not an official member, Turkey's presence at the 10th Brics Summit signifies the group's growing ambitions. Described as the first high-level contact between Turkey and the Brics countries, President Erdogan has good reason to be looking for alternatives. With its EU accession talks stalled after years of bitter disagreements and its contentious relationship with some NATO countries, Turkey has been hedging its bets against an array of options. No one has stepped more into that void than Vladimir Putin's Russia. Meeting with Erdogan on the sidelines of the Brics summit, the two leaders have forged an improbable bond. Despite two serious setbacks, including the 2015 downing of a Russian jet by Turkey and the assassination of the Russian ambassador, both countries have found common ground in places like Syria.
Aramızdaki her türlü dayanışma birilerini de gerçekten kıskandırıyor.
Turkey's invitation to the Brics summit comes as the world braces for a potential trade war, launched mostly by the U.S. U.S. President Trump's tariffs, largely directed at China, have also hit Turkey. Trump has also threatened sanctions on Turkey over the case of U.S. Minister Andrew Brunson. With doubt growing about the reliability of one of Turkey's largest trade partners, the Brics group could offer alternatives. First coined by Goldman Sachs in 2001, the original four members held their first formal meeting in Russia in 2009 in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. Comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the Brics make up about 23% of global GDP and trade. Home to nearly half of the world's population and covering nearly a quarter of the Earth's landmass, the group's ambitions have gone beyond its original mandate of reforming global institutions. Security issues, trade, and global finance are just some of the issues that Brics countries are now tackling. Issues that are definitely on Turkey's radar. Turkey's trade with the Brics group hit $60 billion in 2017. Speculation has risen in recent years on the prospects of Turkey joining the bloc.
In academic and political circles, Turkey is being considered as a possible member for Brics, because Brics was founded to change the US-led unipolar world into a multipolar one. So it is normal for the Brics to consider other states who want a multipolar world, not just Turkey, but also Pakistan, Mexico, and Argentina.
But for now, it's just optics. But the signal it's sending will definitely be noticed among Turkey's traditional allies in the West. James Kim, Straight Talk.
And joining me now are Anastasia Nesvetailova, who is a professor of international political economy at City University of London, and Altay Atla, who is a lecturer at Koç University, who specializes in the Asia Pacific. Thank you both for joining me today. Altay, let me start with you. Talk to us a little bit about the significance of Turkey being at the Brics summit. Turkey is not a member of Brics, but wants to become one. So is this the start of a closer relationship for Turkey with the Brics countries?
Sure, I would say so. It's actually Turkey is now in a position at a stage where it is trying to improve its relations with the rest of the world, with the entire world, rather than focus solely on the Western world. The idea here is to develop relations at a multilateral level. So, and Brics is a very important destination. So Brics is important for Turkey economy-wise. It's important for the Turkish economy. Well, these are large economies, large markets, but more importantly, if you look at the figures, you will see that Turkey's trade with BRICS countries is actually adding to our current account deficit. So last year our trade was 60 billion US dollars with all these countries, but only $7 billion of them was Turkish exports. Now, getting closer with BRICS by participating in this summit and through other structures of BRICS will be helpful, perhaps not to close this deficit, but to have a more balanced relationship with these great economic powers of the world: China, Russia, Brazil, India, South Africa, and so on. So here, what I'm hoping for is that through this summit and the following events, Turkish economy can benefit from this by, getting, for example, improving the relations at the investment level, getting more investment from these countries. So this is one thing. Another thing is, for me, actually, BRICS is representing a current critic of the actual global economic governance system, which is with us since the end of the Second World War. So we are still trying to govern our global economy through a system that was established at the end of the Second World War. And especially lately, with all these trade wars and other things going on, we see increasingly, we can see that this system is not sustainable anymore. We, instead of depending on what you call hegemonic stability provided by one hegemon, so we need a more equitable, a more participatory system where all the actors have a greater say. So, and Turkey is also defending this idea.
Well, Anastasia, I want to ask you, is it possible or even necessary for BRICS to expand? And if it were to become, say, BRICS Plus with Turkey as a member, what would that pact look like?
Fascinating question, partly because BRICS is an acronym invented by a particular specialist in Goldman Sachs some more than 10 years ago that is trying to live up to its acronymic name. They have achieved a lot during this last 10 years, and there is a lot of functional purpose for BRICS to be really a platform for others to join. So that's why the mechanism of BRICS Plus was invented. That's why clearly South Africa, Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey are commonly associated with BRICS and others, meaning that these are emerging or even consolidating large economies that really are the future of the global economy. But to be honest, there is a kind of unresolved question of this BRICS Plus or BRICS Plus Plus, what would it be as a group? It's a platform, it's a group dominated by the largest economy between them, this China, but there are still several important unresolved questions about the unifying trends across these economies that would unite them rather than kind of accidentally bring them together. Not accidentally, but bring them together because they have matured, partly having succeeded in the system that wasn't built for them. They have done tremendously well in terms of growth, social stability, political ambitions, and this was all in the system that is now at the point of transition. I'm not saying crisis, but it's certainly at the point of transformation and transition.
Well, Altay, I want to ask you about Turkey's policy. Is this perhaps a policy shift with Turkey wanting to join BRICS, forming closer ties with China, perhaps becoming a member of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Does this signify a change in Turkey's policy with the West, or can the two work together?
Not at all. It's not a shift, because we always get this discourse. Whenever Turkey is making some overtures or some initiatives with the non-Western world, let's say so, with China, be it China or Russia or the Islamic world, we always get the discourse, especially from the Western sources, that I'm quoting, the axis of Turkish foreign policy is shifting. Turkey is turning away from the West and getting closer with the East, and so on. on. So you can see many examples of this. But come on, I think we are not living in the Cold War anymore. So it's not a world of axes or to which direction you are shifting. This is a global world, and Turkey is trying to become a global actor. Turkey is a member of the G20, and Turkey is making efforts to engage with various parts of the world. Think about China, for example. China is the second largest economy in the world, so it's totally natural for Turkey to establish a constructive relationship with China, to make efforts to that end, to take part in the Belt and Road Initiative, and so on, simply because China is the second largest economy in the world.
Anastasia, this is the 10th meeting of the BRICS. What has BRICS accomplished? What's been its big accomplishments over the years? It seems like they meet all the time and issue a communique, but what really has BRICS accomplished?
A lot of skeptics will say that they haven't accomplished much apart from this acronym and that people are paying attention. But if you see on the ground the statistics of the mutual cooperation, investments between some bilateral deals with the largest economy being China, between Russia and Turkey, there is a mechanism of now including others or inviting others. I think they collectively want to be part of global initiatives, just like Altay said, the climate change, any peaceful negotiation, trade. Interestingly, since 2015, they've been actively preparing or planning towards being not dependent on the dollar, to have their own payment system in national currencies. And if successful, it will be quite a big change to the world financial flows or to the world payment system. And possibly the most tangible kind of contender to the dollar-dominated world. I think in some ways, it might be more modest than somebody might have hoped, or maybe that what we remember from history from the Western world. However, it's clearly an evolutionary mechanism, and in a short period of time, they have done. Of course, they have the the Brics Investment Bank or Infrastructure Bank, with several projects already on the ground and more being planned. So for such a, again, I'm using the word accidental because literally it's an acronym made up by one person that became an economic term. But for such an accidental grouping, they have managed to do quite a bit.
All right, Altay Atla and Anastasia Nesvetailova, thank you both for joining me.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Cities across Iraq have been rocked by violent protests as young people take to the streets to demand jobs and better public services. The city that saw the most disturbance in recent days was Basra in the oil-rich south. Thousands took part in the protests, raising fears that the unrest may delay the formation of a new government. Courtney Keeley looks into why these protests may have a different goal than previous outbursts of anger against the government.
Protests have erupted this month in the southern Iraqi city of Basra and have spread to the capital Baghdad. Iraqi security forces have responded with water cannons, live ammunition, and tear gas. The lack of jobs, clean drinking water, electricity, and sanitation collection top the list of grievances.
We will continue protesting, God willing, until our demands are met. All their promises are false. We will continue protesting until they meet our demands.
They chant for justice, saying it's the fault of corrupt politicians.
We want a change of the politicians. People of the world have gone to the moon and have the most advanced technology. And we are still calling for water and electricity.
Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi is heading a caretaker government as votes are recounted from the May 12th election, and 11 political parties try to broker parliamentary alliances across complex political and sectarian lines. Abadi confirmed the arrests of protesters already in the hundreds will continue. As the protests swelled, the internet was reportedly cut mid-month by the government, and several social media sites remain blocked. Human Rights Watch issued a report calling on Iraqi authorities to lift all internet restrictions except where specific security concerns require a response. Al-Abadi has pledged to release about $3 billion in funds, but this oil-rich country, which has the 5th largest petroleum reserves in the world, had to recently cut a deal with neighboring Kuwait to try to alleviate its energy crisis. While Iraqis demand basic services, the caretaker government, which is reliant on oil exports, continues to ride waves of oil price volatility. Prices have gone up and down recently due to the U.S.-China spat-over trade and the war of words between U.S. President Trump and Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. The security situation is better, but remains fragile. Just days ago, in the relatively stable northern city of Erbil, gunmen believed to be Daesh fighters shot their way into a building, and a standoff ensued for the next 5 hours. 1 civilian and 2 attackers were killed. 60% of Iraq's population is under 24, and the unemployment rate hovers between 15% and 18%. Meanwhile, during the searing heat of the summer, which Iraqis often call days of fire, protests continue. Courtney Keeley, Straight Talk.
And joining me now is Murat Aslan, who is a lecturer of international relations at Hassan Kalyoncu University, and Ali Al-Mawlawi, who is an analyst at Baghdad-based Al Bayan Center for Planning and Studies. Thank you both for joining me today. Ali, let me start with you. Basra, as we know, has been devastated by several wars. This is not the first uprising we've seen in the city, but how are these recent protests different?
Well, you're right. I mean, this isn't the first time that we've seen protests during the very hot summers. I think this time around, what I would say is that they have been marked by some violence, and the protests spread quite rapidly across many of the southern provinces. And so, there has been a lot of popular anger. But as I said, I mean, they're not significantly different to previous protests. I think they have calmed down somewhat over the last couple of weeks as well.
And the protesters are demanding things like jobs, clean water, electricity. That sounds like basic demands, but is it possible for their demands to be met, especially without a government in place?
I mean, I would say there aren't really any quick fixes to Iraq's problems. They are endemic, and they are quite systemic in terms of addressing these problems. There are some things I think the government can do to at least remedy the popular anger that has erupted over the last couple of weeks. But I think really, frankly speaking, there are only long-term structural challenges that need to be addressed in order to really alleviate the problems of the people in Basra in the south.
Murat, let me ask you, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was the first foreign leader to call Muqtada al-Sadr to congratulate him in the parliamentary elections. What does that say about Turkey's policy with Iraq?
Actually, Turkish policy is very clear and brief. Turkey recognizes Iraq as a united country and respects for the integrity of the Iraq. For sure, Turkey intervened Iraq's territory for countering terrorism within the mandate of the United Nations, which means Turkey did it in accordance with the international law, but Turkey respects it. And for the Sadr's congratulation, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, I believe, wants to congratulate since it was a democratic election and the early results indicated his victory, which means everybody should respect it. For sure, there were some allegations afterwards, but still Iraqi mechanisms will engage these kind of allegations and conclude it.
And Ali, what do you think about the role of Muqtada al-Sadr in these protests? Is he undermining efforts to form a government?
Frankly, I don't think it's clear what his position is. I mean, he has made a public announcement that he supports these protests, but the question is he willing to mobilize his supporters on the streets to support these protests? And at the moment, I don't think we've seen signs of those. What I think could happen is if the negotiations to form the next government take longer than everyone expects, then there is a danger that these protests could drag on and could actually impede the formation of the next government.
What about the promises that al-Sadr has made? Is it possible to achieve all these things that he's told the people of Iraq?
Well, you know, one of the problems is Iraq lives, it's a country, it's a rentier state. I mean, basically the country lives off its oil revenues, and the public sector is a huge part of the country. The country has really struggled to pay the salaries and to cover the salaries of this very large network of public employees. And you know, one of the promises that politicians tend to make is that they will promise public sector jobs. In the future, I don't think this is going to be possible. It's really not sustainable to continue to expand the public sector. The challenge really is to build a private sector that can really absorb this high unemployment. And you know, this is a problem not just for Muqtada al-Sadr, but it's a problem for all the political class.
Mm-hmm. And Murat, Turkey's military presence in northern Iraq didn't create a huge backlash in Baghdad. Why was that?
Because Turkey pursues a strategy that is persuasive in the region. Turkey requested what Turkey wants from Iraqi government. It was actually countering terrorism that is based at the north of Iraq. Since Iraqi government is short of responding to a threat at the north, mainly originating from PKK's presence over there, Turkey had to, start an operation to beat all the cells. And it's clear that these kind of operations will continue in future if the same threat, finds a heaven at the north.
What happens in Iraq tends to affect Turkey. How are the protests that are happening now in Iraq, how is that affecting Turkey and relations with Iraq?
There are many concerns for Turkey, especially after the demonstrations, are concluded in a manner that Turkey does not want. The first issue is the Turkmen issue at the north, because we know that some actors in Iraq may exploit the situation, and later then, especially Turks at the north may be harmed. This is one concern for Turkey. And the second thing is that PKK may enjoy additional safe havens, especially at the west of Iraq, very close to Syrian border, and this is exactly what Turkey does not want in the region.
Mm-hmm. What, Ali, role does Iran have in the protests taking place in Iraq?
Again, I don't think that's very clear. I mean, they appear to be quite organic in nature. Obviously, all protests can be politicized, but as of yet, I think what we're seeing are really popular protests, popular anger at poor services, and I don't think that we have yet to see sort of an external intervention, to mobilize protesters.
Mm-hmm. And what about we've seen these jabs back and forth between the U.S. president and Iran? Is that perhaps igniting the situation?
I mean, there's always a concern that tensions between countries in the region and beyond will have an impact on Iraq's stability. Iraq always tries to stay clear of these tensions and tries to take a neutral stance. And that's really probably the best way forward for Iraq, not to take sides. And we've seen over the last 15 years, regional rivalries between the US and Iran have had a negative impact on the country.
Mm-hmm. Murat, what role do you see Turkey playing in Iraq's future?
Well, Turkey has vast capabilities and actually can easily mobilize all states' infrastructure in Turkey to help Iraqis. Mainly the latest demonstrations was due to public service, lack of public service in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And Turkey is ready to support Iraqis to establish an infrastructure and also to create business for Iraqis by creating channels.
Mm-hmm. Ali, do you see a solution in the short term, medium term, long term with the situation in Iraq, given the structural problems that are in Iraq?
I think the challenges are really for the next government to address. We need a new, stable, newly elected government that can take very tough decisions. Those decisions are not going to be popular amongst many people, including this large public sector. Iraq cannot continue to pay these high salaries for public sector employees, and the government will have to take very difficult decisions. I think over the medium term we can see some improvements if those decisions are taken. But as I said, fundamentally, if you look at corruption corruption, if you look at incompetence, poor services, these are structural issues. There are no real quick fixes, and we need not only a top-down approach, but we need a bottom-up approach where there is a strong cultural shift away from emphasis on the public sector and more towards private sector jobs.
But talks to form a new government are at a standstill. What really are the sticking points? I mean, what do we need to get past for a new government to be formed and for Iraq to move forward?
I mean, the biggest issue right now is to ratify the results of the elections. As you know, there was a lot of controversy over voter fraud, and there has been now a recount. So once the recount is completed, the Supreme Court needs to basically ratify these elections. And then we can begin the process of government formation. And that process will take approximately 3 months, from electing the Speaker of Parliament to electing the President and to then voting for the new government.
All right, Ali Al-mawlawi and Murat Aslan, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Rachel Rubel. If you have any comments or suggestions, do share them with us on Twitter with #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.